Okay, so I'm just going to briefly introduce you all. We're running well and truly behind time, so this will be a shortish panel, maybe about 15 or 20 minutes. And the purpose is to have a bit of a discussion about how to make low carb family friendly. And you're all parents, and so Tara, we all know Tara, diabetes educator. She's also the mum of a toddler. Michelle Austin is a change manager. She has two, are they teenagers?
A teenager and an 11-year-old.
Sure. Matt's recently become a dad.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa is a naturopath and she has two children, including a child with special needs. And Mum has a tribe of, Tracy has a tribe of children.
Yeah, we all just call them Mum. Yeah.
And Charlie, you living in there as well?
Yeah, yes.
So Charlie is the father of a teenager. So what I'm going to, let's just, and Peter as well, Tracy, Kimberly's husband and father of many, and our IT support guy. So very briefly, we'd like to kick off with maybe Michelle. Would you like to talk about how you've worked low carb into your family?
Yep. We went low carb because Matt told us to. Not entirely true. I was low carb for quite a while, but we didn't really stress about it with the kids, and then took the 11-year-old to see Matt, and he was, oh, yep, that would be really helpful for this child. One of the, I guess, my best tips for how we've made it work is that because my boys are a little older, being 11 and 13, and we've always sort of talked things through with them, we actually gave them the idea of being in control of when they consume what carbs they're allowed to consume. And so, for example, we buy the lowest carb wrap that you can buy easily, and they have a two wrap limit every day. And they choose whether they want that in their lunch or whether, for the younger one in particular, is a bit more of a fussy eater. I can usually get him to eat anything if I put it in a wrap and put some sauce on it. And so he'll often say, no, I'm keeping that for dinner because we're having chicken and blah. So for us, it was very much about putting them in control of, they knew that these were the things that we said were acceptable during the day, and they came on board pretty quickly, actually. It wasn't something that caused a ruckus at all.
Good kids.
They are pretty good kids, yeah. And they have been my baking testers all along. So every time I come across a potential recipe, they're very keen to try it in case they get something new and fun. And I have to say the teenager's a lot more into it than the 11-year-old. My older son is a low-carb mum's delight. He just thinks everything is fantastic, and typical teenager, I guess. He just wants to eat everything. So, yeah, that was our biggest success, was putting them in charge of, here's your allocation of this particular product. You choose when to do it. Anyone else want to?
Just pass the microphone along, and if you could all just say a few things.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've only got one, and it's pretty new. He's one. It's just turned one. Well, this is the interesting thing, is obviously I have very strong opinions on all of this, and karma has conspired because of all the parents out there I've told, just make them nose breathe, it's easy, has given me a child who from the first day, on day one, first hour, first minute, had his mouth open. I know. He's a nose breather. He's got his mouth open, but his tongue is up. Yeah.
You never do what you want.
But this is the funny thing, is I've contacted several people who are, experts in this area, and I said, why has this happened? Here's these photos. Look at him, first day one. And there I'm pushing his tiny little chin closed because there was a lady from ACT Health taking, it was on Father's Day, taking Father's Day photos. Wait, don't take the photo until his mouth's closed. I was like, how can this happen? This is not supposed to be. And this is where this discussion about the epigenetics of the changes that I was talking about earlier really comes into it. Why was my son born with poor oral posture? Like that. He nose breathes. He nose breathes when he's asleep. We're getting there. 1 year in, it's so hard. There's no compliance at that age, but he's getting there. He can do his little clicks and his pops and all these little myofunctional exercises. I've been recording him because I'm sure he's the youngest patient ever, but he is getting there. When it comes to dietary choices, though, the biggest thing we did, we had his tongue tie cut. He was feeding when he was born, but I went straight underneath and had a look, and I'm like, that is a 50% anterior restriction of his tongue. He was feeding. They sent us home. He wasn't feeding well, because it was only after we had the tongue tie done, had it sectioned, which is quite simple for an infant, that my wife went, oh my God, the suction power is just remarkable, and her milk really came in where it was a little bit limited. And that was a bit scary, because I'm sure that happens to a lot of people. So that was number one, because feeding is important. Number two, always fed him upright for the trigeminal swallow. Won't go into it. Number three, he always eats what we eat. We never really gave him an alternative. He's never had cereal. We just give him what we eat. He eats, well, actually he eats better than I do most of the time. So I think that's where that programming comes into it. If he only knows how to eat omelets for breakfast and how to eat meat, and before he had any teeth, he's got a piece of steak in there, or I would make him biltong, and he'd just chew the biltong for like half an hour. I'm like, yes, he's got his mouth closed. So it was fantastic to see, and I think that's where it comes down to programming. If you only give them what is there, then they never develop that. Oh, sugar's great, let's get some. And his grandmothers are on notice, okay, because they keep, they're sneaky. I feel like there's a little bit of sneaking going on, but for the most part, he's never eaten anything but what we eat, and I think that's just made it a breeze. And honestly, he is the best eater. You should see it, besides the house. All right, I better pass.
Sorry, can I tell you something amusing? My mother-in-law takes my kids every Thursday afternoon. They call Thursdays Sugar Day.
Oh God.
Let's pass it on to Tara, who also has a young child. So we have a range of children of different ages in this group.
Yeah, it probably was a good spot for me to talk, because I've got a 3-year-old, and probably what we all have theories about raising a child with nutrition, and then you become a parent and then everything just goes out the window. But what I really found was that it is a learned response, and I actually see it around other children that come into our house. So, we don't have any flavoured yogurt, bar perhaps a pouch every now and again, which is a very low sugar Tama Valley type. But my son predominantly eats, full fat Greek yogurt with nothing else. I serve that to any other child that comes into my house, and the face on it, it's just, oh, what have you given me? And my son eats 90% dark chocolate. Yes, he will enjoy a normal piece of chocolate every now and again, but you give him that 90% and he is a pig in mud. We eat meat and vegetables, and I do get a lot of questions about, he has to be a kid, but to be a kid, he has to be healthy and eat well. And there's enough pressures from outside that I don't need to bring sugar into my house for him to get it. Yeah. He goes to childcare. I am quite appalled at what they do feed him there, which is why it's important that he gets a slab of meat or a slab of fish, and he gets his veggies, and that's all he gets at our house. He snacks on nuts and cheese.
Unreal. The food is unbelievable. And also, I said, can you please limit sort of these sorts of things? And they're like, no.
Yeah, really. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and look, it is ingrained in him where they have vegetarian fried rice for lunch a lot on the menu at lunchtime. Even though I feel like my son has learned these good behaviours, I'll still say to him on any given day, Ruben, what would you like for dinner? Fried rice.
Wow.
But he knows he doesn't get it, and it's perhaps once a month when we get a little, some treat, and he'll have a bit of fried rice. But for me, it was always teach them from when they're young, and for me it's working, and we do have balance, don't you worry.
Melissa, you have a unique situation with your family. Tell us a little bit.
I do have a unique situation, but I think in some ways it's much easier because Ayla is 15 and a teenager, but she just eats everything that's put in front of her. Because she has an intellectual disability, she's only ever had good food, and she's never really had an opinion about that food. She's just happy to eat it. So she's always had a fabulous diet. The youngest one has always had a fabulous diet, and she's a bigger challenge for me because she's neurotypical. She's at school, she's asking for school canteen, and the school canteen has crap food in it, so she can't have it. We have balance in our household in that there's no rules at birthday parties and there's no rules at weddings. So when we went to Europe a couple of years ago, she ate every piece of bread she could get her hands on and she enjoyed every minute of it. But for me, as a naturopath too, I often hear parents say, my kid will only eat this, my kid will only eat that. And my question to those parents is, are you not in charge of what you bring into the house? It takes 21 days to starve a child. I will take it right up to the mark. That kid will eat what is in the damn house. And if not, they go hungry. Even my child with a disability knows that if she does not eat what's in front of her, she goes to bed hungry. There's no other option. We're not getting yogurt. We're not getting a boiled egg. You will eat what's put in front of you. And she knows that. Both my kids know that. So that's kind of my philosophy around food in our house. There's balance. My kid went to a birthday party the other week. She came in, she said, Mummy, I had a lolly and I had a piece of fairy bread because I wanted to try it. Then I had a belly ache and I was full. And I'm like, you were bloated. And then I couldn't fit in the cake. And I'm like, go you, mate. That was awesome. So, but I'm a bit like Tracy. I teach them at home. I give them all the good foods. She's never had cereal for breakfast. She doesn't know what cereal for breakfast is. She's always had eggs. And then I know that when she hits her teenage years, she's going to go and have McDonald's with her mates or pizza or whatever it is she's going to have. But because this has been ingrained in her from day one, she will come back. No, that's my plan.
Yeah, so I guess my children are a little bit older than everybody here, so I'm starting to move into that teenage trial era and that age that we all go through. I mean, we could probably tell many stories about when we were teenagers and 20.
Let's not.
So we're all still alive. So that's what I have to remember. I have to remember this because I'm, Ashley's 15. I have a 13-year-old. My next son, Dan, will be 13 very soon. And so they are highly influenced by the world around them.
Yeah.
I do know that since Ashley was diagnosed 4 years ago, as many of you know, I'm not very forceful when I talk and I don't talk a lot. So my children have heard me preach and preach and preach. And I just hope that I am that sounding board in the back of their mind when they make choices. One piece of Domino's pizza is not going to kill them straight away. But is it something that I want them to have on a continual basis? No. McDonald's, is that going to kill them, that one meal? No. But is it something that I want them to live off when, say, they're at university? No, I want them. So my children have learned how to make. So my other children, other than Ashley, they have really good sourdough bread. Not all the time, but that's something that we have on the weekends. They will have beautiful eggs and sourdough bread with lots of butter, lots of fat. And they know that's a weekend treat. They know that that is a weekend, something that they have. I teach my children to be mindful about what they're eating, but this is also what I do as a health coach. I teach people, because sometimes being so restricted can cause more stress and more pain than actually not changing your diet at all. Like changing your diet can be really good for you, but if you are so stressed out of your mind about all these changes, it's going to be worse for you. You have physical responses when you're stressed. So I try as best to balance, but I talk to my children all the time. How do you feel after you ate that? Because you know what, even good food, we still get pains in the stomach because it's not good for us. Mm-hmm. There are some foods like dark chocolate does not serve me purpose. I don't eat a lot of dark chocolate. It actually gives me an itchy head. So for the rest of you, dark chocolate is fantastic. It's deemed a health food, but it's not for me. So I teach my children that even within the parameters of healthy food, there will be foods that aren't good for you. So I feel very much you've got to teach your children and yourself. A lot of us have to go back to being an experiment, being a teenager again, and experiment what is right, what is wrong. And we're going to have to drop the ball. We're going to have to go through bad things to come out the other side. So anyway, that's me.
Thanks. And I'm Charlie. I'm the father of a now here we are. A strapping 17-year-old who's this tall. It's off the camera. So I have a longer history to reflect on regarding him. It took a while for him to come along, and looking back with what I know now about supplementations, there's possible explanation for why that happened. I was in a different relationship then with my wife, and I think fair to say, carbohydrates featured more in our diet than they do now with my partner, Dr. Liz. So with my son, who's between the two different places at different times, it's a bit harder to teach him those food habits that I think are what good parenting is about teaching children. And I would love for him to be eating less carbohydrates, but there it is. We have paid attention to supplementation at times, and this is the result of him being so tall today. The same height I might have been if I'd had the nutrient-dense food when I was growing tall as a teenager than he is having now. But there we are, a story of different diets and different families, and hopefully teaching our children good food habits involving good nutrient-dense food. Thank you.
I really would love this panel to continue because there's a huge amount of experience just in this small group. Is there anyone else who has got more thoughts
In regards to which part?
how to make, I'm thinking, for example, how to make that transition. Matt and Tara are doing it with their kids from day one, as has Melissa, but you, Tracy, for example, and Michelle both introduced.
Well, so, I mean, for many people, you know, I have a type 1 diabetic child, so changing diet was thrusted upon us literally within seconds. So, yes, I will agree with, I know it was said as a joke, but you can't starve a child, they will eat. So one of my children, when Ashley was diagnosed, and Peter and I decided that we were going to step up and use diet as a tool to help manage Ashley's type 1 diabetes. We moved the whole family over, and at the beginning part of it, we were quite strict. One of our children was highly, highly carbohydrate addicted, and he basically lived on bacon and eggs for almost a month. That's all he ate. He refused to eat anything else. There were some meltdowns because, yeah, sugar, carbs, it's a drug. He was having withdrawal symptoms. And so he lived on bacon and eggs. To this day now, he doesn't really eat bacon, which is not a big deal, but he still eats eggs, a lot of them. We go through about 180 eggs a week in our house. But yeah, you know, sometimes, you know, you have to take a hard stance. Like when Michelle was talking yesterday, change is not easy. Sometimes you have to just bite the bullet and go hardcore cold turkey. And then you can add some things back in. We now, as I said before, have sourdough bread, but I don't add, my other children are low carb. They are not as lower carb as Ashley, but they don't have the same parameters or issues that Ashley has to face. I do allow treats in my house. My children learn that we don't sit up and have chocolate keto brownie for dinner and then we finish it off with a cheesecake. Just because it's low carb doesn't mean that you eat it all day. So we have chats like this because I am going to have children that are going to go to university or to parties, and I want them to know what real food is and then to move over to things. So, you know, I don't think there's anything bad about changing and being strict with a child's diet, especially, you know, Ashley was diagnosed at 11, so Caleb was 9. I had to teach him the hard way, but now he's got a lot of flexibility and knows. He comes home and he goes, "Mum, it's at the party. I just want a good steak now. I'm like, all right, dude, off you go. He knows what his body wants, what his body needs. You know, I've always told the story about how one of my sons wanted a chocolate breaker. It was about 2 years ago. He was determined to have that chocolate breaker, and I said, right, go for it. He came home and spent the next 2 hours sitting on the toilet, dry reaching, and then had pain in the stomach from the sugar response.
Wow.
That was Ethan.
Wow.
Yeah. And
He's
so,
a sensitive soul, though.
correct. But he had to learn, and now we don't touch chocolate breakers. So, anybody else?
Well, there's a whole new other world. What's a chocolate breaker?
I've never heard of that either.
We don't know a chocolate breaker.
Icebreaker.
Oh, a chocolate milk
icebreaker.
drink from the shop, you know, like a
Icebreaker.
icebreaker
I've never
chocolate.
Chocolate milk.
You know, something that's 3/4 sugar with a dash of milk. Yeah, that one.
I'm with you now.
Oh, there's a dash, just a dash.
So all I was going to say is that it makes living with a toddler seem really simple. All I have to say to my son is if he eats his meat, he'll get gecko muscles and he's absolutely fine.
That's awesome.
So try that one. He knows meat means gecko muscles.
And you triggered a thought, Tracy. One of the big shifts for us, because my boys have only been low carb for maybe a year and a half-ish. They now, if it was on offer, wouldn't want cereal or toast for breakfast. They just think that's super boring and bland and flavourless. In fact, they both just refuse, even when I make low carb bread, they're like, why bother? It doesn't, you know, it's nothing. And their best, most favourite breakfast is anything left over from dinner.
Yeah.
So that's what they want to have in the morning is leftovers. Real food is what particularly the teenager calls it, is that he wants to eat, you know, the leftover chicken or the leftover bacon and eggs, or not, there's usually leftover bacon and eggs. But the other, well, we do go to Costco and barbecue that entire giant packet of bacon. So we actually do have leftovers. But the other observation was that about fasting in children, and I've heard really mixed thoughts about it. I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts about whether it's appropriate for children. And I'm now starting to realise that I would like my kids to take more control over that aspect. The teenager could not be less interested in fasting. He just wants to eat everything. He's very active. But my younger son quite often recently has said, I just don't feel hungry in the morning. I just don't want food. Don't make me. Please don't make me eat breakfast. And so we've been respecting that. And I did say to him, I don't want you to get super skinny, so maybe we should weigh you and see how much you weigh. He's like, that's a great idea. Let's do an experiment. He was totally into it. So he jumped on the scales and he reported back. And his weight hasn't budged. He hasn't changed at all. He's still exactly the same, weighs exactly the same as he did before, but very rare for him to eat breakfast anymore, which is really interesting given that my husband and I don't eat breakfast anymore either. And so there's a bit of role modelling there, but also he came to that on his own and he's much happier like that. And the lunchbox stuff isn't coming back uneaten. So he's obviously eating when he's getting hungry. But yeah, interested in other people's thoughts on fasting in children.
I can attest to that as well. And I think children regulate their eating. They know when they're hungry or not.
When they don't have sugar.
And I think this is the point. Carbohydrate leaves children hungry when they come back for more.
And
Proper food nourishes them and they can power on for a few more hours, doing what's of interest to them.
No, I totally agree. So, I mean, I was a swimmer growing up and I could not eat before I would train. And my father is exactly the same. And so he would allow me to go to swim training. So I would get up and swim somewhere between 3.5 kilometres every morning at 5 o'clock with no food in me. And I could do it. So yes, I was in a fasted state because I hadn't eaten since the night before. Is there anything wrong with me? Well, we won't ask that question. There's not that much wrong with me. I am very metabolically healthy. Fasting, I don't like using the word fasting to a point. I think it is just learning your hunger signals. If you're not hungry, don't eat. And I tell my children, if you're not hungry, don't eat. Because I think we eat too much or we eat too often. But then I do tell my children, you know, when you're hungry, eat well, eat good, eat until you're full. And my boys can go off to the skate park for 5 hours. What's wrong if they come home starving? They're going to eat what I put in front of them. Is that such a bad thing? I don't think so. I think it really, really does help them learn what we're all now relearning is our hunger signals, our hunger cues, and what it feels like to be satiated with good, whole, real food.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you don't need to send your kids off to have a good time and pack them with the raisins and the fruit juice.
I was
to give them energy.
Yeah, I was that really bad mum at the baby parks. I never packed food for my kids because, well, sorry, like go home and we'll eat good food. We're at the park to play. I always would take water. We live in Australia, we take water. I take water everywhere, but
Full of salt.
maybe not then, but now I do. My kids actually run into the kitchen, pour salt in their hand and walk off like a salt lick. But I just let my children, they know when they need salt, they know when they need water, and my children are learning to know when they need food. And I think that's extremely important because let's face it, this is what most of us in our clinics and practices with the people that we're trying to help, we're trying to help them to learn when they are actually hungry.
And everything else. Well, I mean, so obviously I don't have a child to relate to directly here because he's just practically perfect in every way. But except for the math thing. But that's
Let's not talk about that.
No, that's a perfect imperfection. The thing is that obviously I see this all day, every day, because predominantly I'm seeing children, because most adults are like, the way I breathe is the way I breathe. Surely I don't need to say something about that. You do, but with kids, a lot of the time, it's like with you, right? I'm saying, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do a whole bunch of things. And what I find works for the transition side of things in terms of helping, because many parents need help with it as well as with the children, is to say, make it an experiment. Make it something that you're looking at. So the first thing you do, scare them. So I scare them and I say, this is what you're going to look like if you keep breathing through your mouth. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, and look at this kid. Oh, and look at this kid. They're all really dumb because they're mouth breathers and all this sort of stuff. And kids love that because they love it. They love it when someone's just sort of a bit rude or something.
I love you, Daddy.
And also the parents are going,
Wait till they start repeating it.
well, yeah, it is. I always say, make sure you don't say anything to the mouth breathers at school, but do look at them and see if you want to look like that. The thing is that a lot of the time, I then say to them, right, well, this is what I want you to do. I want you to eat these things that you're telling me that you can't not eat, or try eating these things that you can't eat, because a lot of fussy eating when you've got a small mouth, you develop real intraoral sensitivity, it's called. They struggle to eat certain types of foods, and sort of think, oh, they're just being fussy eaters, and that is how it ends up. But a lot of the times, just because that tongue doesn't fit, so moving things around and chewing them is hard. So a lot of the time in these circumstances, it's say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do to make you nose breathe when you're sleeping, okay? And then what we're going to do is you're going to write down every day what you have for dinner, and on those days when you wake up and your mouth has been open, I want you to write down what you've had. And invariably, they come back and say, yeah, I found this out, and I found this out, and I found this out, and isn't this amazing? I'm like, oh, wow, that is amazing. And then they talk about, when we're doing exercises for the breathing, I can show them how their capacity for exercise and stamina and things like that can be directly affected within seconds by what they put in their mouth. And it's quite awesome because they've just spent all this effort and time developing their breathing and things to a point where they're like, I feel great, and their name's on the board and all this kind of thing. But then we change what they've got in their mouth and bang, they've lost it. And a big part of that obviously is psychological, but it doesn't matter because they're like, oh, that's a big factor. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
But is their psychological not working properly because it's been affected by sugar?
Oh yeah, totally. But the big factor with this is you've got to make it theirs. I think, and it's not because I have children, therefore I have that insight into it directly. But it's been a few years now, just watching what's worked and what hasn't, in terms of getting sort of everything across to these parents and families and kids and all that kind of thing. And that's what seems to work, is you make it theirs. And that's easier with some kids than it is for others, obviously, and ages and things like that. Getting them off their screens, that's a whole nother thing.
Okay. We are going to move on to a whole other thing now. We're only 15 minutes late. I think Tracy's got lunch in there for all the speakers. And I'm going to carry on. I'm going to dismiss the fun. And I'm going to thank you very, very much for all your insights.